Hi, my name is Krysta Mirsik, and this is Sensory Safety for Students, Predictable Routines in Instrumental Music. And before we get started, I'm a 4th through 6th grade general band and instrumental educator in the Passaic Public Schools in New Jersey. I have my Master of Music Education with an autism concentration from Boston Conservatory at Berklee. And I'm also a private lesson instructor at the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education. And I'm on the NJMEA Accessible Music Education Committee. So in this session, we're going to look at how predictable routines can support students in the instrumental music classroom to successfully play their instruments. So first we have to examine what is meant by sensory safety. Now, it is a term that I coined myself, but you'll see it in lots of literature because we as humans receive all sorts of sensory input all day long: touch, sight, sound, smell, taste, and we process instantly based on all of that input. But to a student with sensory challenges, making adaptive responses can be a struggle. Students can be both understimulated, overstimulated, or both at any given time by what's happening in a classroom or just what's happening within their own body. So, what are some of these sensory challenges that students might have? There might be tactile challenges. Like I said, students might be hypo or hypersensitive to touch, meaning they can be overstimulated or understimulated. They might even have difficulty understanding how things feel. That could be students have grip issues with their instrument, constantly dropping sticks or mallets, things like that. There might be vestibular or proprioceptive concerns where they have trouble moving through space. You would have that in a marching band situation, someone who cannot find their way through space. They might be oversensitive or under-responsive or have a poor sense of their balance or movement within space, so their personal relationship to the space around them. And then there might also be visual challenges, light sensitivity, or difficulty shifting focus. Other things you might notice, students may have auditory challenges. Loud sounds or high sounds can be uncomfortable. Certain timbres, like a flute, pitch of a violin, those can be uncomfortable. Now, these are just examples. All students are going to be different. Fine details of a conversation might be lost. So if you're having a conversation with the whole class, the student may not be able to pick out specific things if there's other conversation happening around them. This can also be related to their language development and acquisition. There's also something called motor planning and dyspraxia, where your students may struggle with correct hand and body placement. Now, this can happen in developing musicians, but it can also be a sensory challenge if the student is having issues discerning where their bodies are in relation to their instrument. And the students may also have difficulty following multi-step tasks, which we know is a large part of playing an instrument. Now, another thing that we can find combined with these sensory challenges is that many students have anxiety disorders as well. And that can create a barrier to their ability to process and respond in the classroom. So a big part of this session is talking about anything that we can do to support and encourage students to progress and do well in the classroom. We're trying to create a place of safety and positive culture in the classroom. So why are these predictable routines so important in our classrooms? Instructional adaptations are planned procedures. We're not just coming up with these things on the fly. There are specific things that we can do to help students reach their optimal learning. Elise Sobel says that each adaptation should make a student feel safe, secure, and successful in the music room. And I think that matters for all students, regardless of ability. So an actual learning situation and environment can seem strange, can seem challenging. Throw in sensory sensitivities and students can feel overwhelmed. So teachers are there to be what are called the chaos coordinators. And by helping ease that transition through the chaos, we're letting students relax that part of their mind that's already in turmoil so they can focus on the content that we're trying to teach. And then they know that they're in a safe place to engage in learning. So it's important to note we have to keep challenging students who have sensory safety concerns. It's not enough to just say, oh, well, I don't know if they can do it. Let's just give them a really easy part, or let's give them a really simple instrumentation. That's not acceptable. We want to make sure that we're still challenging students to their fullest extent. I love this quote because this is providing structure in the activities and learning situations can build an atmosphere of safety, but the teacher should also ensure that the student's role in the activity is not superficial. For instance, playing a rhythmic instrument that has no musical purpose or value to the composition. We want the student to be an active part of the music making. So I know this chart looks huge, but once a student feels safe in their environment, in their thoughts and behaviors, they can move through the learning and the content and apply it in a meaningful way. Now, a student may never get through this entire chart. That's okay. So first thing we need is for the student to feel that they're in control. So they have to be comfortable in their situation, right? Where am I? Who are these people? What is the expectation? What are the instructions? Because if they don't understand that, they are in chaos. Once they can understand that, then the organization can begin. They can understand the tasks. They can see it through the musical lens that we're trying to provide. That's through steps 1 and 2. And then in step 3, it says learning creates order. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing this. I understand when the piece starts and ends. I can play. I'm part of the group. That one is really important. Then there's the experience of self-control. I can take on tasks and situations. I can perform in a group. And then you can even start to add on things like improvisation, composing. And again, these things will come. They might come, they might not. That's okay. Again, safety of self comes first before any of this. You can't ask someone to improvise if they don't have themselves under control first. By helping students form connections at their level and at their pace, we're enabling students to belong in the classroom. So the most important thing, how can we as music educators create these predictable routines in the instrumental music classroom? We have to plan our environment with the sensory comfort of our students in mind. Take a look around your classroom or the room that you are teaching in. Try to factor in things like the lighting, the acoustics, if you have control over the air conditioning and heating, which I know you may not. Scents, things like those little plugins. I know if I've entered classrooms before and teachers have had them in, I unplug them because for me, they cause sensory issues. I get migraines. So it's something that I just don't like having in a classroom. Factor in things like spacing. Some students don't want to be crowded next to other students. They need a little more space with chairs. You can also factor in things like visuals. If you're someone who loves having posters up, take stock. Is it too much? Do you have a lot of things on your wall? Do you have a little bit on your wall? If you have an administration that likes word walls, is it presented in an organized way? So there's a quote from a teacher here who said, in lessons, teachers want to move on, but students might be distracted by an overriding sensory issue. So we're ready to go. Teachers are ready to move on to the next thing. We have that content already situated. But if a student is distracted by something that's going on around them or in them, they're not going to be ready to move on. So some of the things that we can address as educators from an auditory point of view, you can let students know when there's going to be a big change in things like the dynamics, pitch, timbre. I like to do that when we're listening to an example because it gives students that little preparation just so that they're not startled. You can make headphones available for student use, and that can be just general things to dampen sound. Include visual directions. Here we are in a session, and I'm using both auditory and visual for this presentation. Otherwise, it would be very boring if you were just listening to it. You can simplify your language, right? It doesn't have to be very flowery and detailed. You can be very direct. And then modeling, right? A lot of what we do as instrumental teachers is shown through modeling. From a tactile point of view, you can change the texture of what is on an instrument. You can add felt onto the handles of percussion mallets. You can add stickers to flutes, for example. I use little rainbow colored stickers just so students have a touch point on their instrument. I've also seen it suggested that you use the little Velcro stickies so that students use the soft point of where to touch and the rough points for where not to touch. Now, you may find students don't like that. It's a little bit of trial and error to see what works for you. You can also try time on and off of musical equipment. For example, today you'll play the drum 2 minutes. Tomorrow you'll try 3 minutes. You'll notice a lot of this is trial and error to see what works for your students. And you can also provide straps and supports for instruments that don't normally use them, but I caution you, only do that with student permission. Don't just assume that it is something that they want. I'll give you an example. I had a student who had issues with muscle tone, and he really wanted to play the alto saxophone, but he could not hold it up on his own without supports. So I said, if I get this, device for you, the device was literally just a Barry sax harness. I said, would you be interested in playing? And absolutely. So that was a situation where I talked it through with the student. I never would have just put a harness or an instrument, assistive device on a student without asking for permission first. So for vestibular and proprioceptive challenges, you can have a student wear gloves if it's an issue of them not liking the texture of something or needing a little extra grip. Students might need flexible seating. I always allow students to get up, walk around in the back of my classroom, as long as they're not disruptive to those around them. They may just need to walk around. They're still absorbing information. You can break movement into smaller components. I'm thinking specifically marching band in this case. Instead of teaching a large group of sets, you can teach a smaller group of sets. They can take time in and out of activities. Again, partial participation is better than no participation. So let them join in at their own pace. I've added a little one in here for the general music folks. If you're doing songs and games that allow for extra motion, go for it. And sensory breaks, whatever that is for that particular student. Not every sensory break is going to work for every student. I have a bin of sensory items that I use in my classroom, and just if a student needs it, they can just go grab an item from the bin and hang on to it while we're working. For visual, there are a lot of things that you can do depending on the needs of your students. You can put some kind of transparent sheet over the music to relieve the contrast of that white paper and black ink. You can actually even change the color of the paper. That has helped a lot of students just looking at the music. You can highlight music notes or lines and spaces of the staff. You can use lamps and alternative lighting if your classroom allows for it. I know that might be a big ask. Students might need sunglasses. Like I said before, I suffer from migraines. I've worn sunglasses in the classroom. It normalizes the experience for them. You can videotape lessons to slow them down. YouTube is a wonderful thing. Almost all of my students know that they can hit the little gear button on the bottom of a video and slow it down to 75% or 0.5% if they need to. And if they really want a challenge, they can speed it up, which is always funny for them too. You can enlarge the music or lyrics of whatever you're working on, especially when students are working on music with lines and spaces. That's hard to look at. So I always tell them, let me know. I will, change the music to suit your needs. Be aware if you have any flickering lights in your classroom, that can cause issues and discomfort for lots of different students. On your music, if you have students who are visually distracted by clutter, eliminate all the unnecessary things. If you know you're going to be working only on one section, only print out that one section. If you know that there's 6 examples on the page and you're only going to be working on 3, cut out the other parts. It helps minimize where the student has to put their focus. And then you can also model the actions that you're doing and provide larger instruments if necessary. Another thing that you can do overall for your student is make sure that you have a structured learning environment. Now, this was specific to research that I was doing, so it mentions autism, but I found that having a structured environment leads to success for all learners, not just autistic students. Structure leads to comfort and success for everybody. Students need to know what to expect. So this particular researcher said, I always set out with what we're going to do first, second, and third in a lesson. I explain what our goals will be and if there'll be a break. Everybody wants to know if they're getting a break. It gives the student a sense of control. That's the easiest way so that a student can kind of track what they are doing. And also, we want to be clear with our directions and make sure that there's follow through with consequences in a consistent way. Students will always feel secure if they know what to expect and what's expected of them. So you can create a visual schedule. If you have older students, you can have it written down. You can present it both ways. And then you can give it in multimodal ways as well. You can say it, you can show it, you can have it posted, use your digital tools like Google Classroom or whatever your preferred method is as well. You can do it all three ways. It's just whatever way works because students can absorb that information in many different ways. Specifically, if you teach in a studio setting, you can prepare your students for performances. This also works for concerts. You want to give frequent reminders of the event, date, and time. You want to explain the performance process step by step and give students a chance to interact with the instruments and performance space that they're going to be in. You don't want the first time that they experience the concert to be the day of the concert. That can be very upsetting if they don't know what's happening. So this is considered what's called scope and sequence. So we teach a specific skill, and then we want them to put it into the larger context of the concert. So for example, this person said that a judge would ask a student to make themselves comfortable, adjust the seating bench for the piano, try the instrument, and then play when they're ready. So again, we're going from small steps to large steps of a performance. For myself with band concerts, I start out with showing students, okay, here's where we sit. Everybody find your seats. Here's how we're holding our instruments. Okay, when my hands come up, this is what we do. I go through all of those steps first, and there's not a lot of playing in the very first rehearsal just because we're setting the expectation of what ready looks like. Once ready is set, then we can start the practicing. And they're some of the best looking students because they already know what's expected of them. Something else you can do to create sensory safety is to implement a system of peer buddies. You can ask peers to assist students with additional help or support. And you want to make sure that those peer buddies are prepared and willing to do this. Don't just throw students together. That's an important thing. You will know which of your students are engaged and willing to do this. You want both students in the partnership to benefit from this. You don't want it to just be a one-way street. So you want there to be independence and only support the pair when needed and taper off that support if it's not a needed thing. Don't just say, oh, well, I have students with, some extra needs. Let me pair them with somebody just because. No, only do it if you need to. So again, you want to make sure it's a mutually beneficial situation. Then this is great for practicing and performance. You want to be able to adapt your instruction into manageable pieces. So quickly, we're going to look at executive dysfunction and how we can use task analysis and guided practice to help that. So some students can struggle with executive functioning, which is the parts of the brain that include planning, working memory, impulse control, cognitive flexibility, lots of other things that are on that infographic as well. So for musicians, this translates into a lot of what we do. Fingerings, posture, hand placement, bow technique, lots of things that we have to do quickly, efficiently, clearly. So when we're working on our motor planning, we have to break everything down into its smallest units. Sometimes we get lost in that. We've been teaching a very long time. We know how to do these. We're experts at our craft. We need to think about how to present the information in its smallest parts. So we create what's called a task analysis. We take the information and put it into little chunks for the students so that they can practice the small chunks and then put them together. So that creates ultimate success. So I'll leave this up on the screen for a second because these were just two very excellent quotes about task analysis. For example, the bottom one is explaining, how do we read music? It seems very fundamental, but they have to know, is the note on a line or a space? What type of note is it? How long is it? How do I produce that on my instrument? That's a lot to take in. We have to teach all those individualized skills. So we have to create the steps for that to happen. So here are some examples of a task analysis for a student. This would definitely be for an older student, for how to put together a clarinet. Now, if you're looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, 23 steps just to play the clarinet, this is just an example. Students may or may not need details like this. This is literally from put the case on your lap to here's how you open the case. Not every student is going to need that, but this is truly a step-by-step instruction guide. You know what your students need. So your steps may not be as detailed. Your steps may be more detailed. It just depends on the student. Now this one's a little more broad, but this student was struggling to get to the band room, get their instrument, get it out and ready, and be ready to play. So this is only 18 steps, but it involves walking to the band room, getting the instrument, getting the music, getting set up, showing the teacher that they're ready. So you can see that it doesn't have to be as wordy or complex, but it can include many more steps in the process. And just to show that you already know how to do task analysis, if you teach brass, we already do this when we teach how to do our buzzing. I'm a brass player myself. So when we teach how to make the buzzing noise, it's really just a task analysis, how to make those sounds, the horse noises, the motor noises, making the little firm corners of your mouth, making those sounds. Okay, now try it with just your lips. Now try it with just the mouthpiece. Now try it with just the instrument. That's a task analysis. Task analysis is just writing it out. And it helps our students because it gives them practical, actionable steps. Something else that you can add to it is creating a social story for your students, which is a great way to incorporate your student in the learning process. You can make a video, you can do an audio recording, you can even do it from their point of view. So it helps if they're struggling to hold their instrument, you can record it from their viewpoint so they see exactly where to place their hands. So you're just adding more accessibility to the process the more you do this. You can also use a task analysis in terms of practice skills. A lot of times students don't know how to practice. So you can give them a list of ideas and then they can pick from it. They have a structured way to do everything, but you're still getting work accomplished during a practice session. Like I said, I teach mostly elementary, so students just want to blow through the things that they're good at and say, I'm done. So no, not quite. That's the first thing on the guided practice list. Start by playing your favorite. And then you have 2 more things to pick from a list of 6. You can mix and match to fit whatever your practice needs are. But it lets the students have choice and structure while still accomplishing their goals. But what is the impact of having these predictable routines for music class? There have been studies done, and there was a long-term study of a student who played trumpet for 5 years, and all of these things were taken into account, everything that we just went over, and the band director consulted with a speech pathologist and transferred the skills that the girl, Jenny, was learning from her speech into band, so transfer of skills. They gave her extra physical space in the classroom. They had her music covered in sticky notes and they would remove it one by one in a task analysis form. And they did color coding of notes and highlighting. And eventually they were able to remove the color coding of notes and just creating a more visual space in her music. And they found that it was very successful for that student. So there have been studies done about this. So If a student's sensory and executive functioning needs are supported in the instrumental music classroom, they will feel safe in that structured and predictable environment. And then they're going to be more likely to focus on the instruction being given, and then more likely to succeed in independent music making tasks, which is our ultimate goal. So the prediction and goal is that eventually students won't have to use these supports or use less of them. But if not, that's okay. All students deserve to have a music making experience that's safe and enjoyable. The instrumental music class gives students a unique opportunity to perform, create, and experience music. But if teachers don't adapt their classroom environment in a sensory safe way, you might find your students having meltdowns, withdrawing, or not participating in class. So therefore, it's the job of us, the music educator, to create predictable, comfortable learning environments for all students. It's my hope that this session today gave you some tips and suggestions for how you can do that for your students. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at the email on your screen. I hope this was helpful for you and have a wonderful day. Thank you.